Hello, everyone. How are you today? My name is Rebecca Grier, and I'll be talking about how humans think and how AI changes that. Here we go. I want to start with this story. On the 3rd of July, 1988, Iran Air Flight 655, which was carrying 290 civilians, was shot down by the USS Vincennes. Why did this terrible tragedy happen? Well, there had been previous skirmishes between the US and Iranian forces in the Persian Gulf in the weeks before this, which created a heightened level of stress amongst all of those on board the USS Vincennes. There was a plane that was approaching quickly to the ship. It had taken off from an airport in Iran, one of the few airports in the world that services both military planes and civilian planes. However, those on ship could only tell that it was approaching fast. They could not tell whether the plane was taking off, remaining level, or descending. In addition to this, the Aegis display system was state-of-the-art technology that allowed all of the ships in the area to have the same track number. But how it did this was that the track number originally assigned by the ship was changed to the one that would be for the entire group. This created confusion regarding the track identifier for that plane. They were trying to figure out what the plane's intentions were, but there are multiple communication systems amongst ships and planes and such like this, and they couldn't hail and were getting no response to their requests. So, with limited amount of time, they made the decision to shoot down the plane rather than being hit by the plane. However, they learned after the fact that it was a civilian aircraft. This is a very high level synopsis of this event. There were many other factors that went into play, but this is the main reason that the event happened. Because of this tragic event and the wrong decision that was made that day, the U.S. Navy instituted a program called TADMIS, or Tactical Decision Making Under Stress. This research program taught us a lot about how human cognition works. It led to the annual Naturalistic Decision-Making Conference that goes on till today, and my career in UX and human factors. So what is naturalistic decision-making? What do we mean by naturalistic decision-making is counter to what people used to think of decision-making, in that humans would be logical and make decisions based on choices and weighing options and things like this. We now know that humans sense the real world as it's coming into them. This sensation goes through what I'm going to call a filter that exists in long-term memory. This filter consists of patterns that have been built up over our entire lifetimes. And these filters are filtered patterns, or patterns, the sensations that are mapped to these patterns impact what happens next. The filter, when it recognizes a sensation as hitting a pattern, can either choose to take action immediately. It can choose to pass some amount of information on to working memory, or it can choose to ignore that sensation. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about working memory in a little bit, but first I want to talk a bit more about the filter taking action and the patterns in itself. So these patterns that we have, they can be universal patterns, so patterns that every human on the planet has. So these include the Gestalt principles of perception.
Rebecca, sorry,
yes.
I think are you trying to show some slides?
I am.
I don't see it.
Okay.
If you could start again, please.
I am so sorry.
Not your fault. Oh, here it's good. It's perfect. Thank you.
Yep. So I'll just back up. So the real world is sensed. These sensations go through a filter that exists in long-term memory. This filter consists of patterns that we as individuals build up over time, and that based on what the sensation is and what pattern it strikes in the filter can choose to take an action immediately and bypass working memory. It can choose to pass on some amount of information on to working memory, or it can choose to ignore the information. And this is what is now known as naturalistic decision making, the two patterns or the two different systems, the filter and the working memory, each making decisions in different ways. The patterns that exist in the filter can be universal. These patterns include the Gestalt principles, including things like good figure, that we seek to combine things, Similarity, that we see things as similar, as combined. Closure, that we can have these illusions where we will see a square even though that square doesn't actually exist. There is other things there. Proximity, that we group things that are closer together and separate things that are farther apart. Continuation, that we see these as two crossed lines instead of four lines. And symmetry, that we look for patterns in of themselves and things that repeat. Universal patterns also include mathematics. We are all pretty much using mathematics and the numbers in the same way, no matter where we are. Patterns can also be cultural. So depending on where you live, certain symbols, certain things will be more meaningful to you and be patterns for you, or strike other things than other patterns. So I am told that in France, this is a statue, Les Marionnettes, which is common everywhere. Whereas the picture to the right of that is hurling equipment, and hurling is one of the national sports of Ireland. So one of these might be more meaningful to you depending on where you are in the world or where you're from. We have the good luck cat, common in Asia, and then for people, Americans in particular of a certain age, like myself, E.T. brings back fond memories of movies and Halloween and things of this nature from the 80s. Language is also very much culturally relevant. I'm curious if anyone in the room recognizes the words that are written at the bottom. No one's speaking out. Well, they are all.
Sorry, the sound was off. I didn't.
Language.
Language. In what language?
Russian.
Russian. Any other one?
In Sanskrit and in Arabic.
Yes. And in Hindi.
And
in Irish as well. And then patterns can be individual. It's very hard to represent individual patterns, so I've chosen to represent expert patterns, which have even smaller groups in a lot of cases than cultural patterns. So if you've worked in air traffic control, you might even know what airport the top left is from. If you play chess, you know what moves have been taken and what moves should go next. If you've worked in medicine, you know this ChemBio report, and you can probably tell what further tests need to be done or what treatments to give the individual. If you have a degree in advanced mathematics or physics or engineering, you probably recognize Euclid's equation. For everyone else, these things are gibberish. So we all have these patterns, and this makes us universal and agreeable and very much the same. But everyone's patterns that they have in their brain are different. So as Margaret Mead said, you are unique just like everyone else. And how this comes to play and why this is important is that, as Dilbert's cartoon here shows, the boss says, where can I put my most important files so I won't lose them? I'll balance them on top of the trash can so the janitor knows it's not part of the actual trash. The janitor says these items must be most urgently need of discardation. The patterns in their brains are completely different. So they interpret the signal of putting the files on top of the trash can differently. And we, as people who make products, interpret the signals from our products and the design of our product differently than those folks who are our end users, because they don't know the engineering behind the product. I want to show how powerful these patterns can be. Can I have a volunteer who's able to read English at an A level and not colorblind?
Sure.
Okay. All you have to do is I'm going to present some symbols on the screen. I want you to say them in any order you want to, but say all of the color they're printed in as quickly as possible.
The color.
The color that they're printed in.
Okay.
Yep. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Green, blue, yellow, red, yellow, green, red, blue, yellow, red, green, and so on. You want me to continue?
Yep.
Okay, green, red, blue, blue, yellow, red, green, yellow, green, blue, red, green, blue, yellow.
Okay. Was that hard?
I mean, not extremely hard, but like it got easier as I was, doing it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to present another slide that has different symbols on them. And again, I just want you to read all of them as quickly as you can, or I want you to say the color of the ink that they're all printed in as quickly as you can. Okay?
Yeah, I think I know where this is going. Green, blue, yellow, red, yellow, green, red, blue, yellow, red, green, red, blue, blue, yellow, red, green, yellow, green, blue, red, green, blue, yellow.
Bravo. Bravo. You did that very well. If I knew, this is a phenomenon that we've known about since the 1930s called the Stroop effect. If I knew you more personally and I knew you the names of people in your family, your hobbies, and put words up there, it would have the same effect. It doesn't have to be the words of the color. It's just the most obvious choice. This is because if you've learned to read in a language at a fluent level, that you basically, your brain decides to skip working memory and it will want you to read. And so this other task that we don't do very often of saying colors is not one that is easy, and it's hard to turn and suppress that action that filter wants to take. And so this is a great example of the filter choosing to take action or bypassing working memory and not allowing us to do the task we want to do. And we have to be aware of the patterns that our users have and how strong those patterns are to prevent errors. There have been more than enough instances in history where people have made the wrong choice because technology A had a certain color and a certain action, or a certain symbol and a certain action, and then they switched technologies and was the reverse. And so they made the wrong choices. And it wasn't that they made a wrong choice. It's just that their filter said, no, this is what we're supposed to do. And for various reasons, the filter took over, and that is why they took that action. The filter can also choose to pass the information on to working memory. The first step in working memory is to build situation awareness. Situation awareness has 3 levels: perception, comprehension, and projection. So perception is just being aware that there is something in the world. Comprehension is knowing what it is. So when we go back to the word language written in all of those different languages with different alphabets, you could perceive that those were words, potentially, or that they were symbols of some kind, but you didn't necessarily know what they were. You might have guessed that they were words, but you didn't know what they were. And then projection is knowing what can happen in the future. So if those were buttons on a screen, being able to say, if I press this button, this is what's going to happen. That is the third level of situation awareness, being able to identify potential futures. The patterns in our long-term memory that our filter uses, these patterns can convey all of that information. And so the filter can pass on that entire pattern and have all of our situation awareness already built in. It's very rare that that's the case, but it can happen. When that's the case, then once we have, then we don't need to spend any amount of effort to create situation awareness. We have it, and we can move on to making a decision. We make that decision. We take an action or not, because a decision can be to not take an action. If we don't take an action, or if we do take an action, that changes the world and the whole process starts over again. If, however, the patterns don't exist in our brain to help us develop situation awareness, we need to expend resources to develop that situation awareness, and then spend resources to make a decision, and then spend resources to take an action. Basically, everything in working memory requires resources. And that is what the definition of cognitive workload is the amount of resources used compared to the amount of resources available. And I say that the amount of resources available because for various reasons, resources can change. We are physiological human beings. If we are in pain, as I was this morning with a bad back waking up, I couldn't do my logic puzzle that I normally start the day with because my brain was focused on the pain. If we're hungry, we will have less resources available to us. If we're fatigued, if we're sick, we'll have less resources available to us. If we're in a highly stressful situation, we may have more resources available to us, or we may just have extra resources and the resources we have available are diverted for the fight or flight response. So don't have a static group of resources available to us all the time. So something that could be easy for us one day could require more cognitive workload the next day because we're in a different situation in terms of our resources. And I want to talk a bit more about the resources in a minute, but first I want to do this activity. Everybody in the room can do this. It's quite easy. Can you hear the video? Could you hear the video?
We can see it, but maybe not hear it.
Okay, that's okay. Hearing it isn't as essential. I'll just read it. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball.
Yes.
How many people got 16 passes?
At least 1, 2.
1, 2. Okay.
Yes.
Of those who got 16 passes, did you spot the gorilla?
No gorilla.
No.
No gorilla? No gorilla. And did you want to let's focus on it. Yes.
No, I didn't see back.
Okay. Oops. Sorry about that. How many people had seen a video like this before? Okay. So you spotted the gorilla and you didn't really focus on counting in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Of those of you who were expecting a gorilla, did you see any of the other events? Yeah. So this is a process or a phenomenon called selective attention. Essentially, because everything in working memory requires resources, that filter can choose to ignore certain sensations because that aren't relevant to our task at hand, because it wants to reduce the amount of workload that we're experiencing. It wants to reduce the amount of resources that are consumed while we're doing things. This situation awareness goes by many names, has been observed in many different situations and has been called different things at lower levels. So inattentional blindness was what the original term was for the gorilla illusion. Change blindness has been where there was an experiment where they had people talking to somebody, giving directions, and somebody walked through with a door and the person changed dramatically. And people didn't know that the person they were talking to changed. Banner blindness was found in the early days of the internet, in that very quickly people associated the top of a website as being an advertisement, something that site wanted to sell you, or just information about navigation and not anything relevant to a task at hand. So people started ignoring the banner or anything that seemed to be designed to draw your attention to it. Inattentional deafness is the same concept, but with our hearing. Nose blindness is the same thing, but with our smell system. Our filter is very strong in determining what we get to know about in our working memory. And this is all designed to help reduce the amount of resources required for a task, or to the resources that are being used, so that we can do our best at the tasks that are available. Because when tasks require a lot of resources, we actually it can overwhelm us and we can have bad performance because that's there. But even if fewer resources are required, if we're in a highly stressful situation, we can experience things like cognitive tunneling and the vigilance decrement even when the resources required are low. Vigilance decrement was discovered in World War II, in that radar operators were tasked with looking at brand new radar displays for U-boats. This was a very obvious signal. It would be a complete change to the, not complete change to the display, but there would be a very clear signal if there was a U-boat detected. But the radar operators could only do this for the first 15 minutes of their watch. If they did it longer than that, they came back from the flight as stressed and as tired as the pilot, and their performance in detecting U-boats declined substantially the longer the flight was. Humans were not evolved to be able to see an odd signal and to maintain on something that had very little resources. We have found that by actually increasing the stimulation in that or giving somebody 2 tasks to do, their performance increases and their stress decreases. Cognitive tunneling is also related to high stress situations and our ability to do cognitive tasks in those. Again, it was originally discovered by the military, and it was particularly air pilots that they would, in highly stressful situations, focus on the tactical instead of the strategic decisions, that they would literally only see those enemies that were very close to them and not be aware of other enemies further away. They have actually found this in many, many different domains, especially with poverty. First discovered when they did IQ tests of Indian farmers just before their harvest and just after their harvest. So for these farmers, their harvest time would be when they would sell all of their produce. At that harvest time, that would be the richest of the year, and then they would deplete their resources as they went on. They found a 20-point IQ drop between the immediately before the harvest and immediately after the harvest, that the stress of poverty impacted their cognitive functioning that much. Complacency is also a low stress phenomenon, but also, is a low stress version of the vigilance decrement, but when low resources are required. This has been observed in space station astronauts, in military personnel on long missions. If you ever have driven home from a long commute, and it's a commute or even a short commute, and you're doing it every day, you might notice that you don't remember coming home. You don't remember anything that happened on that commute. And that's because of complacency. Your brain basically says, I don't need to pay attention to what's going on. And then you can miss things. There is a very, very, very narrow area where the stress of a situation and the resources required result in our optimal cognitive performance. We tend to refer to that as flow. So if you've ever been in the zone or in flow, you are in that very narrow area. You're probably going, this is all fascinating, but what does this have to do with AI? I was promised that somebody would be talking about AI. Well, another area of human factors that we had naturalistic decision making is related to how humans and automation interact. In the 1970s, Sheridan and Verplank were working for the US Navy, and they were looking at unmanned undersea vehicles. And they devised a scale of automation. And they basically said at the lowest level of automation, it's kind of like teleoperation. The human does the whole job and then turns it over to a computer, and the computer then interacts with it, or the robot or the unmanned vehicle. And then as you go up the scale at level 10, the computer does the whole job, and it determines whether or not it should ignore the human. And they postulated that as we go from number 1 to number 10, the human involvement in the task is less, and the robot, the automation, the technology is more. However, as technology became more and more advanced and there was more and more automation, it became clear that this is not the case. And Lizanne Bainbridge in 1983 was the first to write it down and called it the ironies of automation. Excuse me. Indeed, at that first level of automation, the human and the automation are doing about the same amount of work. There is a little bit of a reduction in the human work, or the human is being able to do things they would never be able to do beforehand. When we get to levels 2 and 3, it does look like the human's workload is decreasing and the automation is taking over. However, at that level 4, 5, and 6 is where we have seen plane crashes, Chernobyl, the 3 Mile Island disaster, among many other things. Essentially, that the human can't deal with this. automation and a disaster strikes, or there is a near disaster and the human has to spend a lot of work to figure out what's going on. We're barely at the level of level 7. Teslas and other autonomous vehicles are getting close to that, but we've already seen the pitfalls with that, with the number of crashes and deaths associated with these technologies. Levels 8, 9, and 10 we have not yet seen in the world. However, science fiction tells us we should be very careful of 8, 9, and 10. I'm just curious how many folks get the 3 references I have.
That's Hal and
I heard Hal from Space Odyssey 2000, Arnold from Terminator, and then the last one is from Seth MacFarlane's spoof of Star Trek called The Orville. In the first season, there is a AI-based life form that is an entire population of a planet, and how they were developed originally by humans. Humans took advantage of them, and so they've decided they're going to destroy all biological forms in the entire world, the entire universe. So we need to be careful with automation is where we're going with this. This is partially happens because of tech-centered design. When we design technology, we tend to ignore the people. We say, oh, we have a back-end system that we design. We have to put a UI on it. The reliability of that back-end system determines the total system performance. This is never what happens. We need to think about how the human interacts with that system, and that is mostly through the UI design. The UI design can impact the workload that the person experiences, which can impact the situation awareness. The UI can also impact the situation awareness itself. The UI impacts the trust that the human has with the system, which is part of what leads to complacency, as does the reliability of the system impacts the trust, which impact how well they interact with the system. So human-centered design is the approach we should be taking when we're talking about artificial intelligence, because the technology doesn't change human cognition. Everything I told you about that dual system model, if we put artificial intelligence in, it's just another thing for the human to pay attention to. And so this can increase the workload of humans, which can decrease their cognitive performance, unless we're designing that artificial intelligence, whatever the system is, in a way that's smart to capitalize on the patterns that person already has, to help them build situation awareness and understanding of what the automation is doing and why it's doing that. We cannot view humans as a backup, because if people trust a system so well and it's so reliable, they will not use that system, and then or they will not pay attention to what's going on in that system. It's very hard for them to do that. That's where the vigilance comes in. So when they're alerted that there's an issue, they have to recognize that there's an issue, or then diagnose what's going on, and then they have to perform a correction. So it's best to have humans in the loop and have them understand the system. And I'm just kind of want to give an example of where AI has humans being a backup. So I asked ChatGPT in its early days of public availability, do you know Irish? And it says, yes, I've been trained on Irish, also known as Gaelic or Irish Gaelic. And it goes on from there. Irish is not actually Gaelic. Gaelic is a family of languages, such as like French is a Romance language, Irish is a Gaelic language. When I tell it this, it says it corrects itself. But I also asked it about my master's thesis research, which is something very often not known by folks. It's pretty esoteric stuff. And it gave me a wrong answer. So I corrected it. It then said, yes, you're right. And then it gave me more information, which again led to the wrong answer. So 3 times it provided me wrong information. But if I wasn't knowledgeable in these 2 areas, then I wouldn't have known, and I would have made wrong decisions, and I would have gone forward in the wrong way because I didn't know that it was wrong information it was giving me. So human is not a backup. A huge portion of this is trust. Every interaction we have with the system leads us to create a mental model of how that system works. This is known as sense making, and that's the same thing that creates those patterns in the filters. Our trust is what our mental model says is the reliability of the system. We can end up, and humans have ended up, in a situation of overtrust where they say, oh, it's a technology, it works wonders, it does everything. And we trust it in a situation when we shouldn't have. And we don't check it, such as with the ChatGPT, and then we can make an error. We can be in a situation where we distrust the system. So I don't trust ChatGPT very much, so I don't use it, is when distrust occurs. Mistrust is when we use it, we trust it for certain things, and we don't trust it for others, but we're trusting it for the wrong things, all of which results in errors. The user interface is what determines how the user develops those mental models, how they develop appropriate trust. So the user interface needs to convey what's going on behind the scenes and how the automation, how the AI is doing what it's doing, and when to trust it, when not to trust it. For those of you who are experts in AI and LLM, this is nothing new here, what I'm showing, but the fact is most people think LLMs are this magical thing, and I just talk to it and it's an expert and it gives me an answer. And they just think it's amazing. As people have experiences like the ones I presented, they go, oh, this is useless. I can't use it. It doesn't help me with anything. If somebody manages to stick with it or investigate, well, why did it give me wrong answers? Then they'll understand that what the questions I asked of ChatGPT aren't the questions I should be asking ChatGPT. I should be asking it more fuzzy things, or things to help me create a template, to show me what a template is, to give me a draft of something. And then I will be able to work with it appropriately. It would be so much better if the user interface for ChatGPT or other LLMs helped me to know when I can use a system and when I can't use a system, when the system is confident or when it's giving me the right information and when it isn't. So which falls in line with human-centered design. So how do we do human-centered design? And before I go on to how we do human-centered design, this is one of my favorite comics related to human-centered design. Darn these hooves, says the bovine creature. I hit the wrong button again. Who designs these instrument panels? Raccoons. This is how most users feel about technology when they say, I don't understand technology. They feel like it was designed by another species, that they're human and there's this other species of humans that understand technology and create technology, and they're creating it for themselves. We want to create technology for the widest audience possible. There are 6 components to doing this. You have to know your specified users, their goals, and their specified context of use. You also have to know how they define effective, how they define efficient, and how they define satisfaction. And then you have to make sure you're doing that for them. So we do this by 3 phases of user research. The first phase is gathering the user requirements, or informative research. Then there is directive user research, where we look to see what are we doing. We're finding those user requirements in light with a solution that we're thinking of. Then there's evaluative user research, where we look and say, oh, is what we're developing really the right thing? Are we doing it, developing the user interface in the right way? We deliver it, we monitor what we delivered, and we refine user requirements based on that. Informative research, these are the questions that we have to ask, and we have to make sure that every member of our team, development team, knows these requirements or these questions. Who are the users? What are the users' goals? What contextual factors need to be considered? And how do the users define effective, efficient, and satisfaction? When we get to directive research, we're starting to think about what solution do we want to input. And of course, we need to think about the business's success and the business's goals and constraints. But we also need to think about the user and how will our solution change what the user does? Is that change a good value for the customer? Is it actually improving effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction? Or is it just a change? And we have to be conscious of the fact that they're having to learn new models and new patterns and new ways of interacting with the system. And that takes a lot of energy and takes time and takes money to do that. Is it worth it to change their ways of working? Is the benefit that they're going to see enough to get them over that? Are there errors that this is introducing? And what other things can go wrong with both the technology and with the human? How could they make a mistake in interacting with that? How do we design the system to prevent or mitigate those errors, to help them identify that there was an error made and to correct that error? And then lastly, in evaluative research, is the design user-friendly? Does it capitalize on users' patterns? Does it support their situation awareness? Does it support them being in that state of flow? Does it build appropriate trust? Is the user more effective with the system? Is the user more efficient with the system? Is the user happy with the system? We do this with AI by a couple of ways. With ChatGPT, it would have been so much better if it had only answered the question I asked and did not provide more information, because it was in that additional information where it was wrong. We provide some insight into how the system works. We prevent black boxes where the human just interacts and does stuff and they don't know why they're doing those things or what the system's going to spit out in the end. As a contrast is a display that colleagues of mine worked on related to unmanned area vehicles and planning them. The humans would have to plan this on paper, but they weren't always doing the most efficient routes. So a company came up with technology that created much more efficient routes. However, it was a black box. Some information went in, a plan came out. It wasn't the plan that the humans would have done. They didn't understand it, so they ignored it. So we were invited to redesign the interface, and we showed the users, hey, the system is considering how much fuel, where there is spy equipment going on, where the target is, and it's what other unmanned vehicles or other things are out there seeing things. And it planned an efficient route, and it showed them what the route was and what it was avoiding and what it was targeting. The human could then take this information and change the route if they wanted to. In most cases, they accepted the route as it was planned. And in the few cases where they said, I think we can do better, it actually was better than what they could have done. And it was better than what they would have done without the automation. So just by showing what the system is considering in making its recommendation or putting its output, help the human to do better things. In the case of ChatGPT, just changing the language of the answers from being, this is the answer, to this is what I found on the topic. Some sources say there is conflicting information. To put that seed of doubt in there that, hey, I'm not right 100% of the time. This might not be the thing. Allows them to then kind of look and go, where else can I look to see if this is the right information? And giving them that understanding of where it's right, where it's wrong, helps them to be more effective with the technology. So in conclusion, people ignore products that ignore people. And we want to make sure we are actually solving the problem instead of just designing AI because it's cool and it's an innovative solution, but we don't know what the problem is that we're solving. Happy to answer any questions folks may have.
I have a question. So thanks for this. So specifically on that question of human AI or human agent interaction. So one thing I've been looking into is specifically on the lean startup, canvases. So I've started seeing some products that basically you just input a concept of a new product or a company you work on, and the agent will fill in pretty much all the canvases you can think of and give that back to you. So the question I find myself asking myself is, in terms of learning, like as using this as a learning support tool, can you, and based on like the UX principles you gave earlier, like how can we design agents that, what would be the key insights, or key things you could point us towards to make sure that the agent doesn't give that feeling of, oh, this is the right answer, but this is how you can learn to build it for yourself. Am I making sense?
I think so. I mean, a lot depends on the context that they're learning and the concepts that you're trying to teach them and understanding those concepts. I would say that, again, presenting, maybe asking them, the user, what do you think, and comparing and showing the comparison in the answers. Maybe giving them a few ideas and saying, what would you think, and then showing them, but allowing them to interact more with the system. Or showing them, hey, here are websites that, whatever the information is it's pulling from, saying, here are some places. What can you glean from this, information from these places? And then comparing and contrasting it to what the technology gleaned or what other experts might have said. Yeah, those are off the top of my head without fully.
I think that answers my question. What I saw basically is that, like, if you're presented with a finished product, and it kind of ties into the example you gave with the air mapping. So if you're given a finished product without the explanation, you don't really understand, and either you take it as is without understanding, or you just ignore it. Mm-hmm. So that might be maybe the key point in terms, or at least one key point in terms of designing agents.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm happy to answer any questions any folks have. If nobody has any questions in the room, you can contact me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to answer questions there as well. It's been lovely chatting with you, and I hope you have an enjoyable rest of your day.
Thank you.